The small town of Blackridge had always been a quiet place, too quiet. Nestled deep in the hills, it was a place many people left behind, too afraid to revisit once they'd moved on. Yet, for Jamal Carter, it was home. He hadn't set foot there in over a decade, not since he left to pursue a career in law enforcement. But now, the call came. His father, once the town sheriff, was in failing health. Jamal had no choice but to return. His father, Frank Carter, had always been a distant figure, someone who ruled the town with a stoic, unyielding authority. Jamal's mother had passed away when he was a boy, and his father's coldness only grew after her death. There had been little room for affection in their house, only duty. Jamal's departure had been a necessary escape, one where he finally felt free from his father's shadow. But now, as a police officer in the city, he had the experience and training to handle whatever was waiting for him in Blackridge. As Jamal drove into town, the familiar sight of old, weathered houses and half-empty streets struck him with an odd mixture of nostalgia and unease. He could see his father's house in the distance, the small ranch-style home where he'd spent his childhood. It looked the same, though something felt different. The air was heavy, almost thick, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At the town's entrance, a faded sign still read, "Welcome to Blackridge, where peace lives." Jamal scoffed at the irony. Peace, he thought, was the last thing this place had ever seen. Rumors had spread over the years about strange occurrences, people vanishing, eerie sounds in the dead of night, and unsettling shadows that seemed to watch from the corners of the streets. Jamal had always dismissed those stories as nothing more than superstition. But as he crossed the town line, a chill ran down his spine. Was it just the wind, or was something else at play here? Jamal parked his car outside his father's house. The door was open, but the lights inside were dim, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. His father was sitting in his armchair by the window, staring out into the empty street. His once strong and imposing figure was now frail, his face etched with years of regret and secrecy. "Dad?" Jamal called softly, stepping inside. His father turned his head slowly, his eyes weary, yet sharp. There was no smile, no warmth in his gaze, just a hollow recognition. "You've come back," Frank said, his voice raspy. "I had to," Jamal replied, closing the door behind him. "You've been sick. I'm here to help." Frank gave a short, dry laugh. "You can't help me, son. The town, it's already too far gone. It's not like before." Jamal set down his bag and walked over to his father. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" His father shook his head, eyes darting around the room as if he expected something, or someone, to appear from the shadows. "I didn't want you to see this." "The things we couldn't stop," Frank whispered. "This town has a history, Jamal. A history no one talks about. It's been quiet for a long time, but it's not over. Not by a long shot." The unease that Jamal had felt earlier intensified. He knew his father had never been one to speak of the past, and hearing him talk this way only made the air heavier. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. But what? What was his father trying to warn him about? Jamal needed answers. But as the evening wore on, the house grew colder, the shadows longer, and his father's warnings echoed in his mind. He'd been a police officer for years, but nothing could have prepared him for the truth he was about to uncover in Blackridge. The next morning, Jamal decided to take a walk around the town. His father had insisted he stay home, rest, and not trouble himself with the town's affairs. But Jamal couldn't ignore the strange feeling that hung in the air. He walked past the familiar sights, the old diner, the corner store, the small church that sat like a forgotten relic at the town center. The streets were eerily quiet. Not a soul in sight. As Jamal passed the town cemetery, he felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had grown up just a few blocks away from here, but he hadn't set foot in the cemetery since he was a teenager. There had always been something unsettling about the place. The gravestones were weathered, many of them overgrown with moss and vines, as though the town had abandoned its dead long ago. He stopped at the entrance, his gaze drawn to an old mausoleum in the far corner. It was dark, even in the midday sun, and something about it seemed off, like it was hiding something. Jamal? He turned to see Detective Maya Adams, one of the few people he remembered from his childhood. She was now a local law enforcement officer, her brown eyes sharp and calculating. Maya? Jamal greeted her with a nod. I didn't expect to run into anyone today. Maya glanced around cautiously before speaking. You're the last person I expected to see back here. What's going on with your dad? He's been different lately. I don't know, Jamal said, his voice low. He says there's something wrong with the town. That we're all cursed. Maya raised an eyebrow. Cursed? That's a new one. I've heard the rumors too, but they're just that, rumors. People talk, they always have. I don't know, Jamal muttered. I think he's serious. Something's not right here. Maya sighed, her expression hardening. I've seen things. Things I can't explain. People disappearing, animals acting strange. The town's been quiet for too long, but I think something's been stirring. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't the only one feeling it. Something was wrong here, something far deeper than rumors. He had to get to the bottom of it. As he continued his walk through town, the unease grew, almost as if he were being watched. Every corner he turned, every alley he passed, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His eyes kept darting back to the mausoleum. Something about that place was pulling him in. That evening, as he prepared to head home, Jamal noticed a man standing outside the town hall. He was an older man, dressed in a weathered coat, his eyes wild and desperate. He caught Jamal's gaze, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire town held its breath. Don't go to the cemetery tonight, the man whispered urgently. The shadows, they'll come for you. Jamal froze. What did he mean by that? Before he could ask another question, the man turned and disappeared into the night. That night, Jamal found himself lying awake in his father's house, the unsettling events of the day swirling in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen, something that had been building up for years. He decided to head to the cemetery. He had to see it for himself. He made his way through the streets, his flashlight the only source of light in the suffocating darkness. As he reached the cemetery gates, the air seemed to grow heavier, the weight of history pressing down on him. He pushed the gate open slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step he took felt like a mistake, but his legs carried him forward, unwilling to stop. The mausoleum loomed in the distance, darker than before. The wind howled through the trees, and Jamal could hear the rustling of leaves in the distance. But then, there was another sound, something that didn't belong. A low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Jamal froze, every muscle in his body tensing. From the darkness, figures began to emerge, shadows, but not just any shadows. These were solid, twisting, writhing forms that seemed to move with a mind of their own. They seemed to flicker in and out of sight, each one closer than the last. Jamal's breath hitched in his throat as the figures circled him, their eyes glowing a faint red. He backed away slowly, his heart racing. He had heard the rumors, but he had never truly believed them. Not until now. The shadows, the cursed spirits of Blackridge's past, had come for him. Before he could turn and run, a cold, malevolent force gripped his chest, forcing him to the ground. Panic surged through him, but he couldn't break free. The shadows were closing in, their dark, oppressive presence smothering him. Just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, a voice pierced through the suffocating silence. "Leave him alone!" Jamal's head whipped around to see Maya standing at the gates, her face grim but determined. She was holding something in her hands, an old book worn with age. Without hesitating, she began chanting words Jamal couldn't understand. The shadows recoiled, their twisted forms flickering in and out of existence, as if struggling against the power Maya had summoned. Slowly, the pressure on Jamal's chest lifted, and the figures retreated into the night. Breathing heavily, Jamal pushed himself up from the ground. Maya was already at his side, her face pale but resolute. "We need to talk," she said quietly, as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. Jamal nodded, still trying to process everything that had just happened. The town's curse was real, and now he had no choice but to face it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Check out the other creepy tales appearing on your screen now. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. Stay tuned for more, and remember to keep the lights on. See you next time.